It is March 19th, 2025, and Trump is riding on the high of what he called a very successful phone call with Putin on Tuesday, in which the two leaders agreed that Russia and Ukraine would stop targeting each other's energy infrastructure. They also agreed to plan additional meetings for talks in the Middle East. But while the US is acting like we are officially on the path to ending the war in Ukraine, Russia's making it very clear that it has a long list of demands before we get to that point, and that it is not looking for a Minsk III agreement, a frozen conflict in which NATO is able to attempt to rebuild and rearm Kiev and its military. So, where does that leave things? And what should we be paying attention to when it comes to what the Trump administration is actively doing? The ceasefire that it just actively broke in Gaza as it gave Israel the green light to resume bombing there, and the other signals it has given to allies in Europe that it is ready and willing to not pursue peace, but to continue war against Iran, against Russia, and against China. We got into all of the latest with a special guest earlier, so let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is Brian Berletic, a geopolitical analyst and host of the New Atlas. Brian, thanks so much for taking the time to join me again.
Thank you so much for having me back.
I'm glad I get to talk to you today. I know that we're kind of watching the aftermath of the latest phone call between US President Trump and Russian President Putin. And it was on that call that they agreed for Russia and Ukraine to stop targeting each other's energy infrastructure and to continue talks with plans for additional meetings in the Middle East. Now, the White House is acting like this is a major success, like this is the first step and we've got a full ceasefire coming up and then an end to the war. But I didn't exactly get that takeaway from the Kremlin's statement. I can kind of see the ways that they're just, letting this go, letting these talks happen, but not really committing to anything long term because they don't really need to at this point. How do you view the significance of this call and of the ongoing talks that we're seeing between the US and Russia?
I think I agree with your assessment. A lot of people, the Trump administration, people who support the Trump administration want to make this out as if this whole process is revolutionary and a major breakthrough diplomatically. But I don't think that it is at all. I think Russia can see right through what the United States is doing. President Trump had U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth back in February lay out the entire plan, which is a Minsk III framework plus a Syrian-style buffer zone held by European troops, which are right now preparing, as they were told to do so by Secretary Hegseth, preparing to go into Ukraine the moment any sort of ceasefire takes place. You have to see, and I think Russia sees clearly the trap that is being set for it. So as soon as that ceasefire takes place, the guns go silent, the European troops go in, even if they promise that they won't, they go in, and then Russia has to make a decision. Do we break the ceasefire and start a war directly with NATO member states in Ukraine? Is that what we're going to do? And that is the corner that the US is trying to push them into, and the difficult decision they're trying to make Russia make. And I think President Putin has been very careful with his responses so far, saying he's open to the idea of a ceasefire, but the core issue needs to be solved. What is the core issue? He doesn't really repeat it over and over again, but we know that it is NATO. It is the existence of NATO, its mission to encircle and contain Russia. It exists solely for this purpose, and it is an extension of U.S. foreign policy. And Russia knows this, and the United States is posing as a mediator between Ukraine and Russia when this is a proxy war of the United States against Russia. So I think we have to keep all of that in mind as these talks play out.
Yeah, it's been almost kind of fascinating to watch because I noticed that you were pretty much the only person I saw in my sphere of anyone who was drawing attention to what Defense Secretary Hegseth was saying and to the fact that we're watching this play out. And I know that the media is kind of making it as if it's this big battle between, Trump and then Macron and Starmer, and there's this big falling out. But it's like, no, actually things are kind of going according to plan. And you've got the Trump administration administration, they want to ultimately focus on China. That is their ultimate goal. But they're also at the same time making it look like, and I think you made a really good point there with the fact that they're all of the sudden acting like there's some sort of mediator between Russia and Ukraine. And it's like, this is not just a battle between Russia and Ukraine. This is a battle between Russia and NATO. Putin has made it very clear that he's aware of that. So it's almost kind of interesting to watch Trump play this game. And I don't know how, maybe Trump thinks that he's winning it, or he thinks that, these are major successes. I don't know if that's just how he's presenting it. But when it comes to what's actually happening in this war, the need for a ceasefire, right? As you were saying, NATO would love it. It would give them a chance to try to rearm Kiev's military. But for Russia, not only do they not really need it, but it also seems like it would be harmful to the progress that they're currently making. How do you see it, and what is Russia's current position in this war?
Yes, well, again, the United States and its allies, its partners, its proxies, if you will, they see this proxy war being lost. If it continues along its current trajectory, they will lose. Ukraine's fighting capacity will collapse, and Russia will rapidly gain more and more territory. They already are in an incremental, gradual way, but we can see this accelerating month to month, and it will only continue to accelerate until there is just a complete collapse along the line of contact, and we see rapid gains, maybe all the way up to the Dnieper River, maybe beyond the Dnieper River. We don't know. But this is what they're worried about, so this is why they're desperate to freeze the conflict, and just as you say, rearm, reorganize, revigorate the Ukrainian armed forces, and get ready for the next round of hostilities. This is exactly what they did with Minsk 1 and 2. I often use this example of the U.S. proxy war on Syria, how they froze that conflict by creating a physical buffer zone, by invading and occupying Syrian territory. But the U.S. has also done this process directly related to Ukraine, and has try to trap Russia into a ceasefire, or Russian-backed forces, or separatists in the Donbas region, whatever perspective people might have on that, get them to agree to a ceasefire because they were winning and they were about to wipe out what was left of Ukraine's armed forces. And they froze it and they reconstituted it. And they did all of that under the cover of wanting a real lasting peace, when they had no intention at all of doing that. And they have admitted this in hindsight. German Chancellor Angela Merkel, she has admitted that this was just to buy time to prepare Ukraine to exist in the state that it did in 2022, when the special military operation began. This NATO-ized, NATO-trained, NATO-armed force that was able to stop the special military operation from completely rolling over Ukraine and dismantling this battering ram the U.S. has created right on Russia's border.
Yeah, and it's so interesting to me too, because I go, okay, is the goal of the US, do they think that Russia is going to fall for it again? And I guess, is that a possibility, right? I mean, we're seeing Putin be very careful right now, as you were pointing out with his statements. He's like, sure, we would love to settle this conflict through peaceful means, but here's all of these different ways, or here's all of these different conditions that would be required for that to happen, knowing that the conditions that he's laying out are ones that the US is not going to agree to. So is there still some concern that we see a version of a Minsk 3? Has Russia outsmarted that at this point, or do we really not know looking forward?
It's hard to tell, because it's hard to know exactly why Russia agreed to Minsk 1 and 2. I would say that there's equal reason to believe that maybe Russia was tricked, although maybe Russia also just felt like it wasn't ready to fully deal with the Ukraine problem at the time. They weren't ready to launch a special military operation. If you followed Russian military developments before 2014, and then well beyond 2014, there were huge advancements. You could see that they knew there was going to be a problem, and they were preparing for it. They were expanding, they were reinvigorating the military industrial base. They were preparing for precisely this conflict. But did they have enough time to launch it then? I think the answer is no, they weren't ready. So Minsk afforded them time that they felt they could use, and I think we could all agree now did use more efficiently than the collective West did. And now we see the result of that playing out on the battlefield following the special military operation. Does Russia feel like they are a little overextended now? They could use a pause, and they believe, once again, they could use this time more efficiently. Maybe. maybe they think this, but it's not true. Maybe the West is ready to expand its military industrial production, to make drastic changes. The U.S. is actually right now in the process of doing this. People are claiming that USAID, NED, Voice of America are all being dismantled. They aren't. They are being streamlined. These are the tools of regime change being streamlined and sharpened and getting ready to be used more effectively and more widely, more deeply all around the globe. So this is the calculations Russia must make. And if they feel like a ceasefire is going to suit the West more than it will suit Russia, and Russia is winning on the battlefield right now, if they feel they're not overextended, then I think they will be compelled to continue. And if not, maybe they will take the ceasefire, even though it will look really bad. It will disappoint a lot of people, and it could potentially end disastrously if they calculated wrong, incorrectly.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And I think that, we also have to remember, as you were noting there, like Russia's playing the long game here, right? If we were to go into this in 2014, the way that they did in 2022, it would have looked very different. And I look at the Minsk Accords and I think, okay, at the time, Russia may have thought, or maybe they were just trying to give the West a chance, right? They were like, look, we want to do this by the book. We want to do this right. We want to make this, internationally recognized agreement. But then when you fast forward to today, and this also goes back to this phone call that was had in the Kremlin statement, according to the Kremlin, Putin emphasized the fact that the US, if the US is serious about ending the war in Ukraine, then it needs to stop providing military aid and intelligence sharing with Ukraine. Now, Trump is apparently saying that this didn't happen, so you've got two different versions of this, but it also really emphasized the fact to me that, whereas in 2014, 2015, you had the West playing along, they're not really doing that this time. You had Trump take away or say that he was taking away the military aid and the intelligence sharing for about a week, and then gave it right back to Kiev, now putting it on his timetable, on his plate, not just on Biden's. So what is the message that is sending to Russia when you have the US still so blatantly involved? Sure, they say they want a 30-day ceasefire, but they're also saying, hey, we're about to start sending more and more weapons to Ukraine.
It comes across disingenuous because it is disingenuous. President Trump said he wanted to end the war the first thing he did when he got into office. And he couldn't have ended the conflict in the course of 24 hours, but he could have announced policies that would have. He has now demonstrated that he can cut all funding, all aid, all weapons, all ammunition to Ukraine whenever he feels like it, and he is choosing not to. And why is that? If this is supposedly President Biden's war, and this war was unjustified, should never have been fought to begin with, why is he continue? He is making the conscious decision to continue it. And this is, again, everyone has to always remember, this is a U.S. proxy war against Russia. This is not a war between Ukraine and Russia. It is a U.S. proxy war against Russia. And President Trump is making the deliberate decision to continue it. Every single day that it continues, that is his decision. He is choosing to do that. And what demonstrates American intentions is disingenuous even more so is the fact that they just presided over a so-called ceasefire in the Middle East between Israel and Hamas in Gaza, and he allowed that to detonate pretty much. And what was he doing leading all the way up to sabotaging and collapsing the ceasefire? He was sending 2,000-pound bombs to Israel. And as soon as they received all of their bombs, they went right back to dropping them on Palestinians. And people have to remember that a lot of people justify this and say, well, Hamas is irrational. You cannot negotiate with them. But it was Israel who helped maneuver them into power and keeps them in power because they do not want a settlement. They want someone that is always going to justify endless brutality against the Palestinian people more than anyone else, not necessarily Hamas. And then we just heard Secretary Hegseth in Brussels talking about how they need to pass this conflict off onto Europe, who needs to double down on it. Would you say that if you actually wanted this conflict to end? And the US wants Europe to take this conflict over because they need to pivot to China to provoke the exact same kind of conflict there with China that they are now passing over to Europe, that they have been fighting against Russia. So this is not a nation serious about peace. This is a nation that has hit a brick wall, and they're trying to buy time, salvage it, reorganize, rearm, and restart hostilities when terms are tilted more in their favor. And that is all that they are doing.
Yeah, if I am Vladimir Putin and I'm watching Trump and his rhetoric and the fact that, I mean, we had these reports out, right, that Trump had told Netanyahu that, hey, you can break the ceasefire after phase one, you don't have to go all the way through to phase three. And that Netanyahu was then bragging about that to his, genocidal far right fanatics in his government, and that was the way that he got them on board. Because exactly as you were saying there, having hostages remaining in Gaza, well, sure, they got some out, but still having hostages there gives them an excuse to continue bombing Gaza. And that's exactly what they're doing now, claiming, oh, we're going to, bomb Gaza until we get the hostages out, as if everything that we've done over, the last over a year now, as if that wasn't enough to then produce some form of results, which is exactly what we're seeing when it comes to Trump and his rhetoric on Yemen, which is another one that I want to get into here because,
Yes.
we've seen the US, obviously, they joined Saudi Arabia in this horrific genocidal bombing campaign in Yemen for years, creating what was at the time the world's worst humanitarian crisis. Then Biden came back around last year, restarted US bombing in Yemen. And now all of a sudden, Trump is acting as though he is going to be the guy to defeat Ansar Allah, literally just because they're reinstating a blockade on Israel-linked ships in the Red Sea, because Israel reinstated a blockade on humanitarian aid going to the Palestinians in Gaza. How do you see this current situation and Trump's rhetoric?
It's another example of continuity of agenda and how unserious the U.S. is about changing its foreign policy posture all around the globe in regards to absolutely everything. And every single one of these conflicts is just another example of the U.S. using proxies to affect change in regions of the world it has no business being involved in the first place. And we have to remember that this conflict with Yemen goes all the way back to 2011 as part of the so-called Arab Spring, this U.S. engineered regime change campaign across the entire Arab world. They overthrew the government of Yemen. And then you mentioned this horrific proxy war the U.S. waged through Saudi Arabia for almost a decade, and then all of the bombing that has taken place ever since. So Yemen has the right to defend themselves, and they have a right to stand up to these forces in the region, destabilizing it, targeting them, targeting their neighbors. They have a right to stand up. And people forget that the U.S. imposed a blockade on Yemen. So they're not allowed to reverse this blockade on the U.S. and its allies in the region. It's hypocrisy. And again, it is another warning sign to people in Moscow, to people in Beijing, to people all across the multipolar world. The U.S. is not serious. Never once in their history have they ever picked peace over primacy, and that is not about to change with President Donald Trump, considering his first 4 years in office was a demonstration of primacy over peace.
Yeah, we literally have 4 years of Trump to refer back to, right? This is not like the first term where everyone was like, oh, just give him a chance. Now it's, oh, okay, give him another chance. We're 2 months in at this point, and this is what he is pursuing. And I thought it was interesting too. We see this attempt, especially in the media, to act as if Ansar Allah, the Houthi movement, they're just kind of this ragtag group of rebels that is fully supported and influenced by Iran. And we saw this in Trump's statement, where he then started claiming that every shot fired by the Houthis will be looked upon from this point forward as being a shot fired from the weapons and leadership of Iran, and Iran will be held responsible. How do you see a statement like that? Is he kind of showing his cards and saying, the one that I want to target is Iran, and I'm just, going along the kind of chessboard of all of Iran's friends, so to speak, and targeting them? Or I guess, is there more to it?
No, that's exactly it. And this was what the Biden administration did for 4 years straight, and the Trump administration before that, and Obama for 8 years, and then the Bush administration for 8 years. So this is continuity of agenda, uninterrupted, without deviation. This was all about isolating Iran by eliminating its network of allies across the region. We just watched them do this under the Biden administration, wiping out the senior leadership of Hezbollah in Lebanon, collapsing the Syrian state, and now they are targeting Yemen, and they are openly talking about targeting Iran next. Every single policy paper written over the past 20 years has talked about this. They've all impressed upon readers the importance of isolating Iran first, from its allies and then working on Iran itself. And then when you zoom out even further to look at the geopolitical picture, Iran is part of the multipolar world. It is a pillar of the multipolar world. Eliminating it further isolates Russia and China and allows the US to work on these two large, powerful nations. If they could have their way, they would separate Russia from China, defeat them in detail one at a time, because they don't have the ability to do it all at the same time.
Yeah, and if I'm Russia and China, I'm watching this going, okay, the US, well, yes, we have this growing multipolar world. We have strengthening partnerships between countries like Russia, China, and Iran. They're all very aware of what the US is doing and saying. How do you think that they're looking at the US right now, specifically with someone like Trump, who, yeah, sure, he comes in campaigning on peace, but he's also shown that he can flip on a dime, right? He can go from saying, oh, Russia holds all of the cards in the war in Ukraine, to then, oh, we're going to dictate the terms, we're going to force Russia into a 30-day ceasefire. He can go from saying we're going to expel all of the Palestinians out of Gaza, to then going to, I didn't say that, who said that? It's like, this is not a guy who is being seen as a stable ally. So where does that put countries like Russia and China when they're not only responding to it, but also kind of preparing for what the US may try to do?
I think it's safe to say that nothing President Trump says should be taken seriously. Just look at America's actions on the global stage. It's very clear that this is continuity of agenda. Look at the people that he has voluntarily, once again, surrounded himself with: neocons and warmongers. Every single one of them. People said Tulsi Gabbard is going to be the exception. She will be the counterweight to people like Marco Rubio. One of the worst neocons still in politics today. And that is who he picked for Secretary of State. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth is no better. Mike Waltz and Radcliffe, and they have a managing partner of Soros's hedge fund, all together in this administration, the worst of the worst. And they said Tulsi Gabbard will be the counterweight to all this. And now she is cheering on the bombing of Yemen and asking other nations in the region to join in. And so you're left with an administration that is just full of war hawks, bent on continuity of agenda. And so if you are in Moscow or you're in Beijing, I don't think they were fooled for even a moment. I hope that they weren't fooled for even a moment. I hope that they continue preparing for this contingency, which will be this confrontation with the United States, because the U.S. refuses to give up on global hegemony and finding a constructive role to play within the multipolar world. No matter what they say, they're not interested, and you can see it through their actions every single day. And it's getting worse. Just a short time, 2 months, and we already see how bad it is getting, and it's only going to get worse. And if people listen carefully, they are telling you that.
Yeah, and I think the ceasefire in Gaza is yet another reminder of what Trump is not only capable of, but what he's willing to do, what his administration as a whole is willing to do. And, you know, for countries like Russia and China, they have plenty of material out there. If they ever want to think, okay, what is the US going to do? They can just look at all of the things it has done, whether it's in the last 2 months or in the last 2 decades. Certainly a lot at stake here all around. And I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today to break down all of the latest here. Brian Berletic, geopolitical analyst and host of the New Atlas. Thank you so much for your time and insight.
Thank you.
If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment, and as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. That's where you'll find ad-free videos and new weekly episodes of my exclusive series for paid subscribers called Sanction. You can also catch Sanction over on my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Rachel Blevins. As always, thank you all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.